human.
I'm Kira Cleveland, and this is Human Intelligence. With my co-host, Ned Hayes, we talk about the importance of human creativity in the age of AI. Welcome to the future.
It's great to have Nate Angell with us today.
Yeah, well, Nate, I'm so thrilled that I get to introduce you today because you've had a fascinating history, but I'd love to share with our audience a little bit more about that and who you are and how you kind of came to be here.
Yeah, sure. So I live in Portland, Oregon. I've long worked kind of in open technologies and open content with a lot of intersection with education, having worked in places like museums and universities and consortia that are related to the developing open technologies and open content programs. So like one of the most obvious ones of those is work to replace proprietary textbooks with free, openly licensed textbooks. So when I say open content, that's an example of what I'm talking about, to try to lower the costs for students who are sometimes textbooks are one of the biggest barriers to students completing their degrees. So
yes.
yeah, you yourself may have bought a textbook once upon a time. Right? I'm currently working as an independent contractor or independent sort of consultant, primarily on educational technology related things that still have to do with student success. I would say is probably the thing that brings everything together right now. That can often include incorporating open technologies, open practices, and open content into that mix. So that's the short version.
And that is a short version because there's definitely so much more to say. But one thing that's really evident is just how much people matter to you, just within the efforts that you've been a part of and getting people access to things that help them thrive in this world, but also how you view Portland. You seem to very, very much enjoy the community element, the people, the odd, quirky Portland people element. And I liked your comment around like imagining where we would be 300 years from now,
Yeah, like if the world degenerates into a series of smaller city states or something, I imagine Portland being a pretty interesting city state in that environment, or maybe, part of a larger coalition like Cascadia, something like that people have talked about, all the way from British Columbia down to Northern California, something. Any rate, yeah, there's something about Portland. I'm actually a Coloradan by birth, but Colorado and Oregon have things in common, I think, except for the ocean. But there's just something about the vibe here in Portland that's always fit well with me. The people. The only thing that I think I have any criticism of really is Portland has kind of a lack of diversity in it. And I think that's changing now. It's gotten more diverse the longer I've lived here. I moved here in '98, but still having lived in like East Coast US cities or abroad, just the range of diversity that one might find in like New York City, for example, is just so dramatically different than what one finds in Portland. So that's my one dig at the city, but we're working on it.
We are indeed. Your work with Creative Commons was really interesting. Our organization has been compared to Creative Commons, and I'd love to just let the audience know a little bit more about what Creative Commons is and what it enables people to do, and kind of some similarities there.
Yeah, so I worked for Creative Commons. It's been a couple of years now since I left, and I was leading communications and community there. It's really interesting work, and I've always been a community member well, not always, not my entire life, but I've long been a community member of Creative Commons because in my mind, they provide essential infrastructure for doing open content work. And so like the primary example that most people encounter that is with Wikipedia. So almost everybody has used Wikipedia at some point in their lives, right?
Sure.
Anybody who's been on the internet anyway, because they have such good, back when SEO juice used to matter before AI, Wikipedia has always had good SEO, and so they turn up they turn up first in search results a lot. At any rate, something like Wikipedia is really enabled by the open content licensing that Creative Commons supports. Because if you think about it, you're talking about, thousands of people from all over the world collaborating to give their energy and their time to build a common resource. for most people who do.
Just to double click on that.
Sure. Yeah.
Some in our audience might not understand what Creative Commons is. If you could back up a second, just explain Creative Commons, the concept, and then how it is instantiated in the world, that might be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. And as a preamble, even to how it's used in Wikipedia, that's probably a good idea. So if people are familiar with open source licensing in the software world, for example, it's this very similar kind of sort of infrastructure that Creative Commons provide, but for content as opposed for code, right? So if you want to publish something into the world and you want to make it clear under what terms other people can share it or reuse it in different ways, Creative Commons provides a suite of licenses that enable you as the copyright holder in a work to label that work with a kind of both machine and human readable license that explains to people what they can do with your work without asking for extra permission. And so it kind of takes the friction out of asking for permission to do things with content, because you can just look at a piece of work and see that it has a Creative Commons license applied, and then you can know for sure what you're able to do with it without having to go and ask for extra permission. And anybody who's pursued the rights to use content like music, for example, or video in some sort of situation knows what a hassle it is to try to get actual permission from a copyright holder to use something, right? So Creative Commons reduces the friction for sharing, basically. Okay. And it's used in a variety of different contexts. Like I brought up one before around open textbooks, right? So the ability for people to work together, collaborate together to produce textbooks that are then shared openly and often without cost, although openness and cost are two different factors, right? But shared openly so that other people can not only reuse them, but often modify them as well. And localize them to whatever, or modify them so that they fit their use case even better.
That's interesting. And really quick, I have a quick question.
Sure.
With the Creative Commons intention to make less friction for licensing and make it easier for people to just know what to do and move forward with it, what have they found in relation to AI and AI companies? How have they been relating to Creative Commons licensing?
Well, so here's a little bit of the rub, and this is where it gets a little geeky into copyright law.
Oh, yeah. Good. I love it. I love the geeky. Bring it on.
So just as further background, Creative Commons has two main sets of tools. One is this set of licenses that are that's kind of their major contribution, which is, the licenses allow for different kinds of reuse of anything that's licensed that way. They have one other tool, a primary tool that they have published, which is called a public domain dedication. That's actually not a license. So that's for somebody who owns copyright in something and wants to immediately push that thing into the public, that piece of content into the public domain. So it no longer has any rights associated with it. That's not a license because you're not still holding the copyright license to it. You're actually pushing it into the public domain. So just to be clear, that's called CC0. And Creative Commons also has that tool. And sometimes people get confused about the differences between things being in the public domain versus being openly licensed. When you openly license something like with a Creative Commons license, you still hold the copyright. You're not giving up your copyright, you're maintaining it, but you're just establishing a common license that people can understand so they can understand how they can reuse that content. So, but in the case of the licenses, and the vast majority of works that have some Creative Commons tool applied to them do have a license applied, not SCC0 public domain dedication. In that license context, right, it relies on copyright and copyright law to begin with in order to even exist, right? So, and copyright is different across different jurisdictions, but in the United States, the way that it basically works is if you publish something in a tangible form, you establish copyright for it. You don't have to do anything else in order to establish copyright, unless, of course, you're going to get involved in a court case, and then there's another layer to get involved with there. But, basically you publish something, it's basically copyrighted, right?
It's inherently.
Right, it's inherently copyrighted. Because you have that right as a copyright holder, having published something, you also then have the right to attach a Creative Commons license to it that then shares some of that right with other people.
Mhm.
In a context where copyright doesn't apply, Creative Commons licenses also don't apply. Okay, so
Wait. Are you pointing at the fact that you can't actually copyright AI created content? Is that what you're kind of hinting at there, Nate?
that's a different topic even.
But also Vinny.
Yeah, so we're totally getting into the deep geek end here, but I'm talking more about we can think about inputs to AI for training and
Mhm.
copyright status and how Creative Commons licensing might affect those versus outputs of AI, like things generated by AI, and whether or not those are copyrightable, which is what you were reaching for, Ned.
Right.
I'd like to put off that second topic for just a second because
Okay,
it's the
got it.
input side that
Yeah.
we're focused on, at least at first here. And so in a situation where copyright isn't triggered by some sort of action, a Creative Commons license is also not triggered, right? So let me give you an example. If let's say that I publish a novel, I think Ned, you published some novels, haven't you?
Yes, I have 2 novels published. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And there could be certain there could be certain uses of those novels that aren't considered to be copyright infringement. So, for example, you're probably familiar with fair use exceptions to copyright. You're like,
Right.
let's say
Somebody can quote from my novel in a review of the book, a paragraph of it, and say, this is an example of what Ned did here.
yeah,
But you cannot copy complete chapters and publish it, especially under the name, I don't know, Nate Angell, for example.
just for example, which is so close to nowadays, people might get confused. Right, exactly. And so there are other exceptions to copyright. So one, in the United States jurisdiction at least, is sort of like the general area of what you might call text and data mining. So for instance, there was a famous court case around Google Books as a service that tested this case, right? So Google Books doesn't publish all of Ned Hayes' novel, but it does use machines to data mine all of Ned Hayes' novels. And then it surfaces information about Ned Hayes' novels on the internet. It doesn't duplicate those novels, but it found information in them and then it surfaces them. So for instance, you can search Google Books for Ned Hayes and you can see that he wrote these books. I'm assuming, I hope they got you.
Yeah, they did. And I have mixed feelings about it, but I did have a question about that. Are you going to relate this to the recent Anthropic case?
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of cases that are revolving around this now. So in the case of AI, right, one of the core questions here is the degree to which using copyrighted content for AI training is considered to be like a copyright exception, like for text and data mining or not.
Right, like fair use.
Right. Like,
Or-
is it a fair use for my AI to use Ned Hayes' novel as training, or is that a copyright infringement? And that hinges on all these court cases are now sort of entertaining this idea of to what degree is that text and data mining, we'll call it, actually a copyright infringement or not. And so when it comes to inputs, that's sort of the crux of the matter. And there's a whole bunch of court cases now that are trying to figure this out. And frankly, it's probably only going to get figured out in court cases. It seems unlikely to me that there's going to be, say, modifications to copyright law in the United States enacted by Congress that will make this change.
Right. Just to point out something here, I'm a writer, but I'm sitting next to a dancer, and you've choreographed a lot of dances, you've done a lot of dancing, and the reason I'm mentioning this is that we think of text as something that can be mined by AI. But one of the founders of Spawning.ai, for example, founded that company to try to protect human content. We have a partnership with Spawning to try to add things to a registry. But one of the partners who founded it is actually a dancer. And she was concerned about AI being able to map her choreography. I don't know if you've had these concerns as well. Map your choreography and then steal it. And so at the end of the day, we're talking about AI ingesting human creative works, whether that's dancing or whether that's books or whether that's art or photography. The question is, do they have the right to do this? And that's kind of a live question in the culture right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like from some points of view, like a very computery view, right? Dance and text aren't really that different. Both can be mined.
Yeah,
right?
they're both numbers, right?
Yeah, right. They're both numbers at the end of the day. We as humans may feel differently about it. And I just want to say that I myself am not making any judgment here on what is the right or wrong answer about this. I may have my personal feelings, but I'm just trying to explain the landscape right now. Right.
Yeah.
And so the tension that we feel in the air right now is that we have human creatives like you two in dance or in writing, whatever it is, who feel like their works are being not just mined in the way that Google Books mine them so that they can be surfaced in search results, but actually, other works that are perhaps derivative of them, of those original works, can now be produced by these generative AI tools, right? So I could say, write a novel in the style of Ned Hayes.
Or create a dance in the style of Kira Cleveland.
Right.
Yeah. And it'll produce it.
And it will produce something that in most cases isn't an exact copy, although there are court cases where AI has generated things that approximate exact copies.
Well, all of the Studio Ghibli stuff, for example, is irritating if you are a fan of their work because it's close enough that someone who is not a kind of aficionado of Studio Ghibli might feel like it's equivalent. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're actually an aficionado of dance or of writing or of Studio Ghibli, you would be able to tell the difference. But that line is getting very, very close. So it can duplicate things. And that's why we're having this conversation. This is a live topic.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I would just say, like, the court is still out on this matter, right? Like, certain decisions have already been handed down. There are certain cases that are still going on. And I'm going to have to admit, I'm not a lawyer, so I haven't been tracking it on a case-by-case level. But this is where the live questions are at. There's a separate live question about the degree to which AI-generated works are copyrightable, the outputs question that you raised, Ned. Mm-hmm. And that's like a whole nother matter. Mm-hmm. And just the one simple thing I'll say about that is that in the U.S. context, again, our copyrights sort of regulations and laws, like enshrined in the Constitution, suggest that what's copyrightable are things that have significant human authorship. And one could argue that AI outputs don't have significant human authorship. Some people argue, I spent a lot of time on the prompts or something like that.
Yeah.
The U.S. Copyright Office has ruled that, there's probably a threshold. Like, if a human being does enough things to an AI generated output to like significantly modify it, then it may be copyrightable because there has been that human effort on it as well as the AI output. But that's like a thing that would have to be decided on a case by case basis.
We recently got coverage in Silicon Florist for our new mark that we have a trademark in process on, that we're calling the human right mark as a corollary to copyright, human right.
Yeah.
So I know that you've been tracking our progress for a while, Nate. I'm just curious if you thought that's a fair comparison. Like, Rick led with the Creative Commons market and then introduced us as a kind of similar tact. That was surprising to me. Mm-hmm. Surprising to us, but I'm curious, as someone who has worked for Creative Commons, what you thought of that framing.
I think that what Rick was reaching for there is a similarity in the sense that Creative Commons licenses are usually signaled with a mark, like mm-hmm. a copyright mark, but it's a Creative Commons mark, and your human rights has a mark as well, right? So there's a similarity in the sense that there are marks being applied to content. Yeah. So on that base level, there's a similarity. And then the other similarity is that, both, the Human Intelligence Institute, did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And Creative Commons are both, I think, now trying to work to some degree on the same set of problems. So I don't know if you've seen Creative Commons' most recent work, which was started after I left. Well, we were talking about it before I left, but they really only launched it after I left. And it's a thing called CC Signals. It's a new tool set that they're developing that attempts to try to do maybe something that's closer to what you guys are doing at Human Intelligence. And I can send a link for this, but
sure.
It's to to give people a tool, a set of marks with licenses behind them or statements behind them, legal documents behind them that they can put on works to indicate how they would like their works to be, the relationship they would like their works to have with artificial intelligence.
Uh-huh.
And so it's a signaling thing. It doesn't have, in most jurisdictions, it wouldn't have the same force of law that a Creative Commons license would have in a case where copyright is triggered, because it doesn't involve copyright. It's just more of a preference signaling mark, if you will. And again, it's brand new. They're still working it out. But there's some early documentation on it that I could throw in the chat here for you.
Yeah, so we can definitely put some of the links that you provide in the show notes to this episode. Thank you, Nate. Just to put our feet on the ground here, so you know where we're coming from. The issue that we heard in the world was that human creators were not clearly identified, and that they wanted a way to clearly state that they were using their own creativity to make something. And so they wanted a way to foreground themselves, to elevate their own creativity. So what we're about is really elevating human creators and preserving the value of human work, with acknowledgement that we live in an age of AI. So, without the tsunami of AI, I don't think our work would matter as much.
No.
But it really seems to matter now. And you've talked to some creators, Kira, I know, that are really passionate about this. We heard some curse words in that focus group, right?
We did. Yeah, there's a lot of people where it's being seen and being found on many of the different social media channels is getting harder, or even identifying what is AI content and oftentimes misinformation, or things that are misleading for consumers of different creative works. Those artists are getting really upset. They want a way to be found. They want people to know that they can trust this channel, that they can, that they want consumers to know that they can support other human creators. And that's what we're getting to, is that point where consumers want the ability to have informed consent or informed choice on where to spend their dollars and who to support, and to keep human creativity alive.
Am I going to buy human art today, or am I going to buy a synthetic knockoff? I mean, that's really the choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is we did hear some anger in this focus group, kind of this mad as hell, not going to take it anymore from AI or from AI companies. But when we started talking about that, we heard from human creators, they didn't want the anger. They wanted wonder and joy at the idea of human creativity. They didn't want to foreground fighting. They wanted to foreground the excitement of the human process. And so that's really where we're emphasizing in our outreach to people, that kind of wonder and joy of the human creative process is a wondrous thing. It's not a thing that should be discarded so easily.
Yeah, or where the distinction between human creation and other kinds of creation is so murky that we no longer even recognize it, right?
Yeah.
Well, it does strike me that you guys are, you're negotiating things at the very edge of what's important. And I think the U.S. Copyright Office also illustrated this, because they're basically saying with every published work now, the degree to which it represents human creation versus some other kind of creation has to be evaluated in order for it to be granted or not be granted copyright status. And so that line, they're actually saying that legal definition has to be negotiated on a work by work basis, and think about the complexity of that, right? Like, who tracks their creativity in such a way that they can undeniably prove that it was entirely their own or even a purely human creation? Like, that takes a lot of thought and work to do that. So
it does.
The Copyright Offices would actually probably benefit from your mark being successful, in the sense that, like, oh, well, if it has a human mark, then it's copyrightable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's our hope. That's our commitment is finding solutions, because it is a significant lift to expect the creator to manage that chain of creation. They do need support. They do need tools to make that easier. And we do need a process. It's going to be ever evolving.
Right.
That's the wild part, is there's not even going to be a one solution and we're done. It is going to be a constant iteration and iterative process, as AI continues to shift and change.
And there are some other groups in the world that are tackling the same sorts of questions.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how C2PA and the ISCC is also starting to try to address these issues and provide tools for proving provenance.
I haven't geeked out really deep on either one. I'm sort of aware of what they're trying to work on. But I mean, I think in general, they, like you all, are kind of working around the same set of issues. And that's that, once we had the internet, we sort of had a global system to find unique identifiers for individual computers, for example, or individual browsers in use on computers, right? So right now, my computer has an IP address that it's using to do its work, as does yours. And this is how we send information back and forth on the internet, right? Because we now have this global system to have like literally almost like mailing addresses for computers, right?
Yeah.
It's, in my mind, and this is probably an oversimplification, but this is sort of the same idea for content, in the sense that like a certain piece of content needs to have needs to be uniquely identifiable in some way. Mm-hmm. And then attached to that unique identification can be a series of other things, like its authorship, its copyright status, its licensing, its provenance, its references to other works, whatever.
Or as Kara pointed out, the chain of creation behind it. Like, it's not just provenance of like, where did it come from, but how was it created? What was that chain that led to this final output? And before we go further down the rabbit hole, maybe we could just define ISCC and C2PA for those who might not know.
Yeah, I might have to ask you to do that, because
Sure.
I didn't have everything ready.
No, it's totally fine. So about a year ago, I think you actually introduced me to ISCC. It's the international standard for content, I think, certification out of Europe. Mm-hmm. And it's been moving very slowly through the process of becoming an ISO standard, so that works could be locked in a certain format, and you could be, to some extent, guaranteed that original work was the same work when you got it later, that it hadn't been modified or changed, and they do it through a cryptographic hash of the work and a representation of that work that can be cryptographically secured. That's a very high-level description of it. So I tried on ISCC. I think it did okay. Maybe you could take a gander at C2PA.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there, and I'll just point out that one of the reasons why this is important is not only the reasons we've been talking about here, but also because the provenance of certain content can matter so much in a world filled with what people have been calling AI slop, especially, right? Because it's like, let's say a photograph or a video has been made that purports to show something. Like, mm-hmm. What is the provenance and validity of that work? Did it actually come from the stated author? What was its life in the world? When was it created? How was it modified? Blah, 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 blah. And so in a world of, information disorder that we suffer from, that kind of, addressable content identification, cryptographically, verifiable information content would be valuable for that reason as well. Yeah, so remind me of the other organization that you were talking about.
C2PA. So I just recently chatted with Leo Rosenthal, who mm-hmm. is the C2PA, I think, technical chair right now. He's also at Adobe as the head of the PDF standard, I believe. And his perspective on what C2PA is providing is really helpful. Just to speak to the value of it, what they're trying to do is to provide a way that every piece of content can have trackable provenance alongside it, which is very similar to kind of the ultimate goals of ISCC.
Yeah, and I know, so it stands for the Coalition for Content. That's the C2 part. provenance and authenticity. I see a lot of what they're doing is they're thinking a lot about things, and Adobe makes sense from the tool creation side, right? So when the human uses a tool to create a piece of content, that can start its provenance chain, right? And so that's why you see a lot of people in that are either the makers of tools or the consumers of tools. So you also see media companies like BBC and Meta and so forth that are interested more in the information consumption side in a world with information disorder, right? Like BBC wants to know, like, is this a real photograph of something that happened or not, right? Yeah, so I mean, these are aligned, probably overlapping, and they may be ways in which they duplicate each other's efforts, but also ways that they extend each other's efforts. And I haven't, researched them enough to know all that, or even which one will win out or whatever. But I think, both are attempts to just bring that level of sort of addressability and verification to the individual content piece, which is, again, how do you even decide? Like in dance, what is the individual content piece of a dance? Is it the video that someone's taken of your dance? Is it the, the written choreography, which you don't always produce? Well, what is it? It's a complicated problem to solve.
It really is. And honestly, I think we could have another 3 to 5 episodes on this topic still. But we are kind of coming up to the end of our time. And I just have to say it's been fantastic getting to pick your brain on this. You have such a rich background. And it'll be interesting to see how this conversation continues to evolve, because it is going to continue to evolve. For sure.
Yeah, just let me add one last thing, maybe.
Absolutely. One last nugget.
And I think this dovetails exactly with the work that you guys are involved in, is the idea of how human creativity is going to live on in the world, I think, is one of the most important questions. It's an economic question. It's a question about emotions and joy and creativity as well. And so I think that doing work at that intersection is absolutely necessary and fundamental, because we could live in a world where actually human creations are more valuable than they were ever before, because there's so much other stuff in the world that wasn't created by humans, and so it's possible that your dance will actually be a more valuable thing, or your novels will be a more valuable thing, because you can prove that they were human created.
I totally agree.
We appreciate that. That was a fantastic nugget to end on, and we appreciate your reflection of that too. It's definitely a worthwhile conversation, and one we're excited to continue exploring. And thank you for exploring it with us today.
It was really a pleasure to be here with you talking.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. As always, this episode is available online at humanintelligence.news. You can find out more about any of these news items and hear the complete interview on the extended premium version of our podcast at humanintelligence.news. Today's episode was produced by Ned Hayes and engineered by Muhammad Adnan. Our analog-only human-themed music was created for the Human Intelligence podcast by Josh Pinkston of Nature and Spirit. This episode, and every episode, is brought to you by the Human Intelligence Institute team. That's all for Human Intelligence today.